Welcome to Now in Books podcast, Joanne. I'm so grateful for you taking the time to join me today to talk about your debut novel.
Thank you so much for having me today. I'm so happy to be here.
Joanne Yi is the debut author of the young adult book, All the Tomorrows After, which is a Now in Books book club pick. And reading it, Joanne, I just have to say I was in awe at how well you captured emotion on the page, how well you led readers through Winter's eyes and her experiences. I think it's a talent that I don't always come across when reading books. You very skillfully led readers through Winter's experiences, and the way you did it was in such a way that it was from her point of view, but we were able to sit in those moments with her and through the range of moments that she went through, including the grief. So I want to start with, what was your inspiration behind starting All the Tomorrows After? What sparked the creation?
Well, this book was heavily shaped by my own journey through grief as I faced the loss of my father to terminal illness. And I was very compelled to try and give shape to our family's experiences, such as the anticipatory grief, the loneliness, the isolation and guilt, and the sense of running out of time, as well as what my father himself might have been enduring at the time of his illness. I wanted to explore this grief on a deeper level from a teenager's perspective. So the story really began with the idea of a lonely and angry teenage girl whose only anchor is her dying grandmother.
I am so sorry for your loss. We're heading into the holiday season. And on my mind, I know a lot of people who this is not the best season for them because it's a very family oriented season. And I thought it would be a good time to highlight the process of grief because I feel like your book depicts the entire range. And one of the things that struck me nearly from the beginning is the quote you had, which is, grief doesn't begin with death, and Winter experiencing the long tail of it before seeping into the media, I think was a real depiction of it. So I wanted to talk about your intentions and how you structured the
Mhm.
grief in the story because it's such a major theme and the elements you use, one being your chapter setup. Can you tell me more about that?
I am really glad that you brought up the chapter setup because I intended to use a very close first person perspective. And I've heard that this book almost reads like diary entries. It feels like we're very much inside Winter's head, and I'm very glad that came through. I really wanted the grief and the emotions to feel like they were happening in real time. With grief, my intention there was that I realized just even within my personal life, it is still a challenge to intentionally talk about grief, even though loss is such a universally known experience. And it's uncomfortable and it's daunting for a lot of people, which is so understandable. And one of my bigger goals was to openly face and explore grief of different kinds, to really lean into the darkness, but also show the possibility of real connection and belonging through vulnerability.
The structure of the paragraphs was really helpful. Yeah, diary entries is a good description of what it felt like. For me, it felt like vignette, like scenes from her day life. So
Mhm.
we didn't focus on things outside of those moments, and it really set us in those moments. Another thing that I really like was your use of food, intertwined with the moments with her grandmother, her Haimoni. Her relationship with her grandmother was so pivotal to the story. That was her mother figure. And I wanted to touch on the grandmother's character from your perspective.
Mhm. I love your point about the mother figure because I really intended mother figures to be one of the more prominent themes in the book. Harmony, or Winter's grandmother, is, of course, her favorite person. She has been Winter's home and her safety for her entire life. And so, in a sense, when Harmony becomes ill, it's as if Winter's world is unraveling and she is trying desperately to hold on to it for as long as she can. This in turn bleeds into her dreams of her future. When she dreams of escape, she always dreams of Harmony right there next to her. and she hopes to keep Harmony with her as long as she can. I am also happy that the mother figure in Harmony came through, even though her presence in the book wasn't as prominent. I really hope to show her through Winter's emotions and her memories of Harmony.
She doesn't have dialogue. We don't have her inner thoughts as much as we do Winter, but she was still such a resonant character in the narrative. And it was through the emotions that Winter attributed to her, through the memories that we're able to see, and those shared moments, like making the food or remembering the last time the food was made, remembering sitting down next to her, reading it. It didn't feel as if she wasn't a prominent figure because she was so prominent to Winter. She was factored in everything Winter was thinking about and the care that she was given to her and her goals of moving out and going away and taking her with her. You mentioned the theme of motherhoods, and we had three different mothers here. We have Harmony and Sunny, and then we have Helena, the stepmother, in a sense. How did you go about building their characters and making them distinct from each other?
Mhm. Well, Sunny, of course, is Winter's biological mother, but she is selfish and toxic, and she had Winter at a young age, and in a way is openly bitter about blaming Winter about the future she never had. And I wanted Sunny to be sort of a catalyst for all the changes to come in Winter's life. She has lived with her mother for so many years, and she is reaching this point where she feels that she might not be able to do so for much longer just because of the way that her mother is. And Helena, on the other hand, I wanted to invert the stepmother trope in a way. I wanted her to be the loving maternal figure that Sunny never was for Winter. But it was also equally important for me to show her as realistically flawed, not blameless. And so she and Winter are able to slowly overcome their differences over time.
They made a great dynamic, and it almost felt as if it rounded Winter's character and her vision of what a family would look like. And then looking at these three people, just knowing another quote that comes up is not everyone is good. We're all morally gray. And I think it was important to show that in all of the characters. And you do such a great job of that. Another relationship or character to highlight here is June. So I thought June was really needed to give that youthful balance of what Winter was experiencing.
Um, I hoped June would be the balance to Winter, and I intended him to be the new friend and the love interest that she never expected and maybe never wanted. In a way, she believes herself to be invisible, but June sees her anyway. And June himself is an outwardly cheerful guy, but Winter sees through that also. And so they're able to be deeply vulnerable with each other in a way that they can't be with anyone else. And so to your point, yes, I think June was necessary to the story. And in terms of the youthful element, for myself personally, it was a lot of fun writing this relationship because it brought me back to those high school days of having a crush and everything being new, that heart fluttering sensation. So yeah, that was a fun relationship to write.
I could kind of tell. There's a scene where they're talking about the blushing and the first moments. And I'm just like, you know what? I do kind of like remember it. It was very cute. And I'm just like, even though I don't know what he looks like, but it's very descriptive, like, we put our own impressions on what a character looks like. I'm just like, I could see him. I could see the awkward moments. I could see the hair being messy and things like that. So, yeah, he's definitely a fun character and he balances her out. And I really like that he didn't just serve her story, he was full as a person. He has his own issues, his own complications, and was another dynamic of a family that Winter could look at and compare her own experience with. But this one was also, it's not perfect. No family is perfect. So I definitely want to dig into Sung's character because he's the father, he abandoned her. And I really understood Winter's anger. I felt that probably because I'm looking at Winter's point of view and we get his point of view. and his vulnerability. So when you were writing the story, were you trying to redeem him during the journey?
Earlier, you mentioned morally gray characters, and I really wanted Sung to be exactly that. Um, he is Winter's estranged father who is compelled to return and spend time with his daughter for his own personal reasons. He made decisions in the past that heavily affected his family, so it's understandable that Winter is slow to forgive him. But ultimately, there were events that led to those past actions. And one of the main points I wanted to show was that at the core, Winter is much more like Sun than she is with Sunny. And in her dreams and the passions and maybe even in the personality, she and Sun are a lot more alike. So they are able to connect on a more profound level. And she's able to empathize with him to a greater degree in spite of the past hurts. And I think it was important for me to show that, yes, in a way, he does redeem himself in the end, but also that Winter herself is a very flawed character. And because she's flawed, she's able to see her father's flaws in a new light after they connect a little more.
It's so good that you brought up Winter's character because she is extremely flawed and not very nice in the beginning. And I felt like June humanized her. And I think their relationship softened her in a sense where you mentioned that she didn't feel seen and he comes in and he sees her. And maybe that was when she realized that she was not being the best person. And that dynamic helped her in her other relationships. How would you describe her as a character for people who are wanting to pick up the book and also her journey?
Well, Winter as a character is very jaded and shuttered throughout a lot of the book, I suppose. She becomes a bit more trusting and hopeful over the course of the story as she connects with people and builds her community. I have heard that Winter is prickly and a bit unlikable, as you just mentioned, and honestly, I will take that as a compliment because I landed on her voice after trying out several different lighthearted versions, and these abrasive qualities were very intentional. Her priority is not to please people or to worry about what they might think, but to protect herself after years of getting hurt.
As a New Yorker, I really liked her personality. I mean, yes, she wasn't very nice, but maybe I'm just used to the not nice. I don't feel like she was outwardly terrible, but I understood where she was coming from. I understood her anger. I understood her attitude. I understood how that all came out externally. And obviously, people who are coming into interacting with her day to day don't always know that. And I think that also fed into her character. She's very isolated internally. Even her friends, who she doesn't necessarily consider her friends, don't know all the time what's going on with her. So I think her journey was a really curious one, but it was like
Mhm.
a really typical one in the best sort of way. I just feel like high school years, that's kind of the personality that you get. We're all dealing with very adult things while we're still developing. And for the most part, our immediate and most easiest response is anger. And she had all the rights to be angry based on her circumstances. So going back to some of the elements you included, I touched on food, but I
Mhm.
wanted to get a sense of not just the moments between Winter and her grandmother, but the food that you mentioned and the music that you mentioned and the location of the setting for the story.
Mhm. Well, for food, I myself live with my grandmother for a good part of my childhood, and so I grew up with a lot of the Korean food that is mentioned in the book. I feel that food and childhood snacks are so nostalgic and so precious for so many people. I was hoping to capture that particular feeling of home. And for Winter, that means cherishing the memories and the love that are associated with her grandmother's cooking. And it means finding community and belonging in new ways over shared meals at the dinner table. And with music, I would say it's similar. We often hear that sound is linked to memory. It evokes so many emotions. And this is definitely the case for Winter. She grew up listening to these old Korean ballads with her grandmother, and these bonds became a sort of safe space that she can return to again and again over time. You also mentioned location, and location, I think, was in part writing what I know very well. I don't believe it was ever a question that the story would be set in SoCal in these parts of Orange County and LA. And my priority was to try and maintain the unique spirit of the area with the people and the culture that make it so. And I think it's also rather fitting that Winter lives within a suburb, given how small she feels that her world is sometimes.
The moments with the food, I keep bringing them up for a reason because as I was reading it, it attached me to my memories of Thanksgiving and a full day of prep before the actual day of cooking and waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning and chopping vegetables with my mother and all day, like sneaking food and things like that. I felt those moments most deeply because it resonated with memories that I had in those family moments. It was such a powerful element to include, and the music as well. Love music. I feel like I find books that have music in it in some way because music is so much a part of our lives. And it really does tell stories and it ties to our emotions. And all of the scenes within the novel where we see Winter experiencing music, sharing music with others, really ties us to those moments and those connections. And through the food too, she shares meals with June, which I think also was what helped solidify their relationship. So those two things really, I think, did a lot to tie. They're almost characters in their own way.
I am very glad to hear that.
So this is your debut. Can you talk about what your journey was like before starting as a writer and what it looks like now that your book has been out into the world for a bit?
Well, like a lot of people, I knew from a pretty young age that I wanted to be a writer. I was very into fanfic and poetry as a teen. I'm sure a lot of people can relate. And I planned to study writing in college, but I ended up in a different field as things go. I think this actually helped me realize what I was missing though, and writing grounded me in the midst of grief in a way that nothing else could. And so from there, it began with writing classes. And then I thought about pursuing my MFA, where I began writing this book. I took a long break from the first draft of this book because of the heavy themes. And so it took a while for me to come back to it. I had to feel that I was ready to do so. And it's been a step-by-step process to get here. And I think it will continue to be like so many things. In terms of what life looks like now after my book has been released, well, first, I'm very happy and I think just overall very grateful for these opportunities, including this podcast. And in another sense, there has been a lot of vulnerability because just in writing stories, we put so much of ourselves into these stories. And it is very vulnerable to realize that people that we don't know all over are reading these words. But in a way, it is also a way to connect with readers. And so I am very happy with that aspect.
I could totally understand the level of vulnerability, especially because it's such a heavy theme of grief. You've probably seen some of the reviews or readers have mentioned how the story might have helped them. Grief, in its sense, while it's individual, what we're going through, it's universal. We're all like, everyone is going to get to a period in their life where they're going to grieve for something. And having these bodies of work that discuss that shape how you deal with it, frame how someone else is experiencing it, I think is truly helpful. So I could see how this experience of being vulnerable is something you have to get adjusted to, and hopefully something that you continue experiencing, because if this is what it looks like for you tapping into it, it's a wonderful place and source of exploration. What can readers expect from you next?
I am currently working on a second YA novel, and it'll explore the themes of chronic illness and pain, grief for the self, and different kinds of deeply entwined fate. I'm also hoping for this one that it'll be a little more romance forward because for all the tomorrows after, I felt that Winter and June's storyline was a bit of a secondary plot.
I was so entrenched in the grief. Maybe I wasn't thinking about that. I just felt like what Winter was going through was the main thing. And sometimes when people are steeped in grief, those relationships kind of seem distant, and maybe that's how I was viewing it. It didn't feel that way, but the moments they had was so prominent. It sounds exciting to have a more romance theme going. I love romance books. Um, so always looking to see new stories. And that is exciting to hear. What is something that you watched, read, or listened to that you enjoyed and would recommend to others, and why?
Oh, that's a fun question. I am really drawn to darker stories and Korean dramas that dive into the human condition. And this isn't a new one, but I really enjoyed the K-drama Mr. Plankton. It's about a terminally ill young man on a quest to find his biological father alongside his ex-girlfriend. And it has comedic and romantic elements alongside the serious. So I feel that it is appealing in different ways to different audiences. And on the book side, I recently read And the River Drags Her Down by Ji-hyun Yoon. It's about a teenage girl who brings her sister back from the dead using ancestral bone magic and the consequences that follow. And it is such a beautiful and powerful exploration of grief and sisterhood. And I am still thinking about it days after I finished.
That book sounds so good. I have a copy of it. I have so many books. It's so good to hear that that's a personal rec of yours. Where can readers find you online?
Readers can find me online on Instagram at Writing Jojo and on my website at joanneyi.com. Those are my main channels.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your new book, All the Tomorrows After. Really appreciative of you giving us the time to talk through it.
Thank you so much for having me today. I am so grateful for this opportunity.